Good morning. Aloha as well. I bring you greetings from Hawaii. By the way, do you know what aloha means? Very important for this conference and conversation. It's the presence of the divine breath. So I think we're going to need a little divine intervention as we think about these problems of education in the 21st century. I start with Einstein's quote, "The formulation of the problem is often more important than the solution." We in education are too often afflicted with a problem I call answeritis. We're pursuing solutions to problems that are not well understood. What's the problem in education? Well, we've been talking for 25 years about failing schools and the need to reform them. Anybody want to go to reform school? Punitive language. I would like to respectfully suggest that's not the problem. Yes, indeed, some of our schools are failing, but if we merely aspire to bring our disadvantaged students up to the achievement levels of our middle-class kids, we will fail all of our kids and our country going forward. The problem is not one of failure and reform, it's one of obsolescence and reinvention. Just as the one-room schoolhouse became obsolete as we turned to an urban industrial economy and created the factory model assembly line schools we still have today, so now those schools have become obsolete in a knowledge and innovation-driven economy. Three challenges compel us, I think, to reinvent education K through graduate school. Number one, knowledge today is a commodity, growing exponentially, changing constantly on every internet-connected device. We teachers used to have the corner on the knowledge market because we were the only ones who had those expensive things called papyrus reeds, clay tablets, and then books, right? But now it's all right here, right? On every internet-connected device and changing constantly. How many of you had to memorize the periodic table in high school? Raise your hands. We all did. Some of you may have just had a bad, year. But there we go. And so you can all tell me, of course, how many elements there are, right? I can't hear that. Well, whatever I ever came up with is wrong because two more were added last month. And can we have a moment of silence for Pluto, please? Really? I mean, after all those years of having been a planet, it's tragical. Knowledge, growing exponentially, changing constantly, problem one. Problem two, because knowledge has become so ubiquitous, jobs are changing profoundly. Our kids will not have the kinds of conventional careers many of us or our parents may have had. Law, medicine, engineering, accounting, all of those careers are being fundamentally disrupted. What our kids will have, if we are fortunate and work hard, is a set of opportunities. And the question is, will they have the skill and the will to seize those opportunities or to create their own opportunities? Because increasingly, the world simply no longer cares how much you know. That's a commodity. What the world cares about is what you can do with what you know, which is a completely different and brand new education problem. Because now the problem is developing both skill and will. Certainly content knowledge remains important, but more important, I would argue, is the skill to transform that knowledge to create new knowledge, and the will, the motivation to engage. And that, of course, is the third problem that Brian and the researchers of Gallup have highlighted so incredibly well in their research. The problem is student engagement. He gave you the data. Kids, in fifth grade, 8 out of 10 are engaged in their learning. By the time they're in high school, it's fewer than 4 out of 10. Why? School has become more and more boring, I would suggest, because so much of it is test prep. One curriculum, test prep. But the other problem, I think, is that for many students today, the internet is their preferred education provider. The internet never laughs at you because you've asked a dumb question. The internet never tells you, Google never says to you, well, we don't have time for that. Quite the contrary. You can be the architect of your own learning on the internet. You can connect. You can collaborate. You can create on the internet. All things that you cannot do in most of our classrooms. So I'm going to talk about these three challenges, but I'm going to focus especially on skill and will. What skill? Will developed or motivation developed how? And I'm going to talk about these things in the context of a kind of an odyssey I've been on. And I'm going to try to do it quickly to allow time for your Q&A. But I read Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, a number of years ago. Scared the heck out of me. How many of you have read that book? He describes a world where increasingly jobs are being either offshored or automated. And so I began to worry about what kinds of skills will our young people need in a global knowledge economy? And are they the same skills they need for learning and for citizenship? Are they something different? So I talked to a wide range of executives, literally from Apple to Unilever. I talked to military leaders. I talked to college teachers, community leaders, did focus groups with recent graduates, wanting to know, what are the skills that matter most today? What are the gaps? And I came to understand that there's a set of core competencies every young person must be well on the way to mastering before the end of high school, not just to get and keep a good job, but equally important, to be a lifelong learner and an active and informed citizen. I would argue that for the first time in history, the skills you need for work and the skills you need for citizenship have converged. They are the same skills. But we don't talk about the citizenship side of that very much, do we? Very briefly, they are the 7 survival skills. Number 1, critical thinking and problem solving. Over and over again, I've learned that the leaders in any sector, big business, small business, nonprofit, expect every employee to engage in thinking about how to continuously improve a product, a process, or service. But when I asked those executives, what is critical thinking, it got really interesting. Because they said, you know, critical thinking is all about asking the right questions, asking really good questions. Not the right answers, the right questions. Number 2, collaboration across networks and leading by influence. Increasingly, all work is in the world is being done in teams, and more it's being done virtually, teams working together from around the world, except, of course, in education. Talking to John Starr this morning, superintendent of Montgomery County, whom you'll hear from in a moment. And we were lamenting the fact that education is arguably one of the most isolated professions in modern work life. How are we going to teach kids how to work collaboratively? How are we going to model that behavior when we ourselves in education don't do it? Third skill, agility and adaptability. Pace of change, complexity of problems, demands and favors those who are agile and adaptable. Fourth survival skill, initiative and entrepreneurialism. It was Mark Chandler, who was then vice president and general counsel at Cisco Systems, who explained to me how large businesses like his worry constantly about keeping that entrepreneurial spirit alive. He said something quite striking to me. He said, if I have an employee who sets and meets 5 goals, that's no longer good enough. He said, if on the other hand, I have an employee who sets 10 stretch goals, but maybe only succeeds at 7 or 8, he or she is a hero. But what would that person be in our schools, having missed 2 or 3 out of 10? C, B student? Come back to this issue of risk and failure in a few moments. 6th survival skill, I guess it's the 5th now, effective oral and written communication. And it's the #1 complaint of both college teachers and employers. But it was Mike Summers at Dell who put an interesting spin on it for me. He said, you know the reason these kids can't write? Because they don't know how to think. They don't know how to reason. And he said, that's only half the problem. The other half of the problem is, and I quote him, they do not know how to write with voice, meaning to put their own passion and perspective into their communications so as to be persuasive. 6th survival skill, accessing and analyzing information. Talked about that. 7th survival skill, curiosity and imagination. Now, when I read this, I had also read Dan Pink's book, A Whole New Mind. How many of you have read that? So he talks about curiosity and imagination in the context of an increasingly sophisticated consumer economy where we want more sophisticated products and services. But I've come to see the need for curiosity and imagination in a completely new light in terms of my recent research. Well, 2 things happened when this book came out, a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing was, from my point of view, I began getting invitations all over the world to speak about these new skills. From Taiwan to Thailand to Bahrain to Singapore to Panama to Australia, Spain, England, Finland, from West Point to Wall Street, and everywhere I went, the response was the same, almost universal. People said, yep, these are exactly the skills we need. Spoke to Fortune 200 CEOs a month ago. Jeff Bezos got up and said, yep, these are the skills we look for at Amazon. I was thinking maybe I'd made a contribution until the other thing happened. And I'm talking about the global economic collapse from which we are still struggling. Because, as some of you may know, for the first time in American history, we had kids coming home with a brand new BA degree, the ink barely dry, an average of $26,000 of debt, and no job. Or a job that doesn't pay college graduate wage and doesn't require a BA degree. When you worry about government debt, you want to know the debt to really worry? College debt. We don't know how these kids are going to pay off their loans. Right now, today, the combined unemployment and underemployment rate of recent college graduates is 54%. And it's not budged in the last year. What went wrong? This was the American dream. What's the problem? Two things, from what I can understand. Number one, I had naively assumed that you go to college, you become more skillful, right? Not true. Research from the book Academically Adrift points to the fact that as many as 1/3 of all college graduates are no more able to think critically or write effectively than when they started college. They took a bunch of courses, they went to some cool parties, but maybe they didn't become any more skillful. But I also have come to understand that those 7 survival skills, while absolutely necessary, are simply no longer sufficient because employers, now having the pick of the market, want something more. Increasing competition demands that they constantly improve, that they, in a word, innovate. So they want employees who bring this, as they call it, a spark of imagination, something more to the job than just skills. Now, we've always been known as a very innovative country, though no longer the most innovative. Why? Is it because of investment capital, infrastructure until recently, liberal immigration policies until recently, strong copyright protection laws? What is it? What about our education system? Part of the problem or part of the solution? Are we educating young people to become the innovators that they want to be and that we need them to be? Trivial Pursuit question of the morning. I will ask and answer it so fast you won't be able to Google it. What do Bill Gates, Edwin Land, the inventor of the Polaroid instant camera, Bonnie Raitt, the folk singer, and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook fame, all 4 have in common? They were not college dropouts. They were Harvard college dropouts. That's different. That's very different. Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, ordinary college dropouts. I love doing that to Harvard. So with this new book, I became really interested in the question of what must we do differently to develop the capabilities of many more young people to be innovators. And by innovators, in this sense, I'm defining innovation as creative problem solving. There's 2 kinds of innovation, incremental, disruptive. Most of us are born with the capabilities to be creative problem solvers. We're born curious, creative, and imaginative. The average 4-year-old asks 100 questions a day until those qualities are schooled out of that child. So I'm talking about those capabilities. With this book, I interviewed a wide variety of young people in their 20s who were creative problem solvers, some in science and technology, some in the arts, some social entrepreneurs. I then studied their ecosystems, interviewed all of their parents looking for patterns of parenting. Then I asked each one of them, was there a teacher or a mentor that had made a significant difference in their lives? Most could name at least one teacher, rarely more than a couple, and the teachers' grades ranged from elementary all the way to graduate school. I interviewed all of those teachers looking for patterns, and I found one that I find deeply disturbing. In every single case, the teachers that had made the greatest difference in the lives of these innovators were themselves outliers in their educational settings, teaching in ways that were fundamentally different than their peers, yet remarkably similar to one another, I discovered. Then I went to those few schools that have a reputation for teaching innovation. Didn't take me long because there aren't very many. But I went to the MIT Media Lab. I went to the D School at Stanford. I went to the brand new Olin College of Engineering. I went to the High Tech High network of schools in San Diego and to the New Tech High network of schools around the country. Went to some extraordinary early childhood and elementary programs, Montessori, Reggio Emilia, and again discovered a remarkable pattern. The ways of learning and teaching across all of those grade levels and those schools is remarkably similar and completely consistent with how my outlier teachers teach. So I've come to understand that the culture of schooling, as we continue to practice and perpetuate it in most places, is fundamentally and radically at odds with a culture of learning that develops the capabilities to innovate. Radical contradictions in 5 respects. Culture of schooling is all about promoting individual achievement, rewarding individual achievement, sorting people according to individual achievement. That's fine, except innovation is above all a team sport. So all of those teachers built accountable teamwork into every single assignment. Number 2, culture of schooling compartmentalizes knowledge. Chemistry lives all the way over there, far away from math, when they ought to be taught together, and many other subjects equally discrete and separated, and we favor specialization. Problem is, innovation happens at the boundaries of academic disciplines. Knowing this, all of these teachers took an interdisciplinary, problem-based approach to learning in their classes. Contradiction number 3 is the experience of schooling, which is profoundly passive and often infantilizing. There's only one expert in the room, and you spend most of your time listening to him or her. By contrast, these teachers in these schools that developed innovation capabilities focused on empowering their kids. They focused on trying to create opportunities for kids to solve real problems, create real solutions. The emphasis was on creating, not consuming. Last 2 contradictions I think are the most challenging of all. Contradiction number 4 has to do with how we treat failure in schools. It's a very bad thing. You don't want to fail in school. The result is we create a culture of risk avoidance and compliance for both students and adults. But the problem is, innovation demands that you take risks, make mistakes, and indeed fail. I went to IDEO, the most innovative design company in the world, learned the company motto is fail early and fail often. Hell of a way to run a company. But when they explained it, it made all sense, because there is no innovation without trial and error. I went to the D school at Stanford talking about the problem of assessment. One teacher said, yeah, we're kind of thinking F is the new A. Now, I don't recommend taking that back just yet. I think it's a little tweaking required. Talked to a young woman at the Olin College of Engineering who taught me my new favorite word. She said, we don't talk about failure here. We talk about iteration, going from 1.0 to 2.0. We talk about how we reflect on work we've done, whether it's in a project or in a course, and apply what we've learned to the next project or next course. Last contradiction has to do with motivation. I said I'd talk about skill and will, about engagement, which I think Gallup has appropriately indicated as critical to people's well-being. You know, we rely heavily on extrinsic incentives to motivate learning in school. A's and F's, carrots and sticks. I have to wonder how many kids would go to class if there were no grades. But here's what I discovered. In every single case, the young people whom I interviewed, whether they were from privilege or poverty, and I interviewed both, were far, far more intrinsically motivated, wanting to make a difference more than they wanted to make a lot of money. Then I went back and tried to understand what had their parents and teachers done to reinforce and nurture these intrinsic motivations. And I discovered another pattern. Both parents and teachers had reinforced 3 things: play, passion, and purpose. Parents encouraged much more discovery-based play, less structured time. As one mother said to me, sometimes kids have to get bored in order to learn how to get unbored. They had fewer toys, toys without batteries. They limited screen time. Teachers also built a spirit of play into many of their units. Ed Carrier teaches engineering students at Stanford, talked about bringing an element of what he called whimsy into every project he gave his teams of students. As these young people grew older, the parents were very intentional about listening carefully for what was it that most interested this child. And they often took risks in supporting a child's interest, even when they had no idea how that child was ever going to earn a living, being an artist or a drama major or whatever it was. But they understood that for a young person to find and pursue a passion was far more important than mere academic achievement for its own sake, because it is the best way to learn what we call grit, tenacity, perseverance, focus, self-regulation, and the discipline required for mastery. Teachers the same. They built time into their units of study where kids could ask their own questions, design their own investigations, pursue learning for its own sake. Finally, as these young people grew older, their passions morphed and evolved. They didn't stay the same. But in every case, they matured into a deeper sense of purpose. And it's because very explicitly, both parents and teachers had reinforced one simple message. We are not here on this earth just to serve ourselves. We have some responsibility to give back and make a difference. And developing empathy, capacity to experience others' realities who are less fortunate, is as important as any of the other skills we've been talking about. Well, let me take a couple of minutes to explore what I think are some of the implications. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk at your tables and develop what I hope will be some rich and challenging questions for all of us. The first obvious challenge, I think, is that we have to reinvent our accountability systems, as Brian was saying. We are trying to do accountability on the cheap, using factual recall, multiple choice tests that tell us almost nothing about college, learning, or citizenship readiness in the 21st century. And worse, because there's such high stakes on these tests, we're turning increasingly every classroom into a test prep curriculum. We need to advocate accountability 2.0. What that means is testing the skills that matter most, and the tests exist. College and work readiness assessment, collegiate learning assessment are skills. The new PISA test, a test predominantly of your ability to apply what you've learned. But they're more expensive, so we're going to have to go to a sampling or auditing strategy. And we're going to have to rethink the fundamental punitive nature of our accountability system. But we have to assess the skills that matter most. We also have to do that in ways that are more qualitative. I want every student to have a digital portfolio when they start school. I want students to start collecting their best work that is evidence of mastery, of critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creative problem solving. Because I will promise you, employers increasingly are saying certificates, graduate diplomas, resumes, they don't mean anything to me anymore. What I want to see is evidence. I want to see evidence of skills, evidence of accomplishments. So I think we're going to move from a certificated society to a competency-based education and learning system. Finally, in terms of will, I have one small suggestion. How many of you know about the Google 20% time rule? Raise your hands. A number of you. You go to Google, you have permission to play on company time a day a week. Work on any project of your choice. Google tells me that that has been the greatest engine of innovation in new product development of anything they've done. And they're not the first or the only company to do it. 3M has been doing it for years. So here's my modest proposal. What if we said to every student who started school, you're going to be the architect of your own learning 20% time? Whether it's a day a week at the end of the month, a month between semesters, but 20% of your time, you're going to pose your own questions. You are going to ask yourself, what do you want to get better at? What do you want to understand more deeply? We're going to hold you accountable because you're going to be documenting your work in your digital portfolios. We're going to be sitting down and talking with you. We're going to be coaching you. We're going to invite you to iterate your learning by reflecting on what you've learned and what you want to learn next. So this is not playtime. This is not free time. This is students as the architects of their own learning. And I would modestly suggest that it may also be time for students to explore career and work options. I would like to see all high school students have work and service-based learning internships, and the same for college. I think the one way we solve this problem that Brian has flagged so well for us, Brandon, is that we give kids chances to explore real jobs in the real world.